worst presidents of the 1900s. Let's start our journey. 8. Warren G. Harding, the 29th President of the United States. Harding's administration was marred by a massive scandal involving oil reserves and government contracts. Secretary of the Interior Albert Fall was convicted of bribery, and Harding's involvement was widely suspected. Harding's appointees were accused of corruption, nepotism, and cronyism. His Ohio gang of friends and allies, including Harry Daugherty and Charles Forbes, were implicated in various scandals. Harding's handling of foreign policy was criticized for being indecisive and inconsistent. He failed to respond effectively to the Japanese invasion of Manchuria and the rise of fascist Italy. Harding's economic policies were misguided, leading to a sharp decline in government revenue and an increase in debt. 7. The most significant scandal of his presidency was the Watergate break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters in 1972. Nixon's administration was accused of covering up the scandal, which led to widespread outrage and calls for his resignation. In July 1974, the House Judiciary Committee voted to impeach Nixon on charges of obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and contempt of Congress. Nixon expanded the Vietnam War, secretly bombing Cambodia and Laos, which led to increased U.S. involvement and criticism. His policy of Vietnamization aimed to transfer responsibility to South Vietnam, but it ultimately failed. Nixon implemented wage and price controls in 1971, which led to inflation and shortages. His Nixon shock trade policies, including a 10% import surcharge and tariffs on Japanese goods, damaged U.S.-Japan relations. 6. Herbert Hoover, the 31st President of the United States, is often regarded as one of the worst presidents in American history. Hoover's presidency coincided with the onset of the Great Depression, which lasted from 1929 to the late 1930s. His economic policies were criticized for being inadequate and ineffective in addressing the crisis. Hoover's administration was slow to respond to the crisis, and his policies were seen as too little, too late. He believed in laissez-faire economics and relied on state and local governments to provide relief, which led to widespread suffering. Unemployment rose to 24.9% during Hoover's presidency, and poverty became widespread. Many Americans lost their homes, businesses, and savings. Franklin D. Roosevelt, his successor, publicly criticized Hoover's handling of the Great Depression, saying that Hoover's policies had made things worse. Hoover's administration was also criticized for its handling of environmental disasters, including the devastating Dust Bowl and floods. 5. Jimmy Carter, the 39th President of the United States, is often viewed as one of the least successful presidents in modern U.S. history. Carter's presidency was marked by a stagnant economy, with high inflation and unemployment rates. The economy grew only 2.3% during his term, one of the slowest rates in U.S. history. Carter's presidency was also marked by an energy crisis, which led to long gas lines and rationing. He imposed price controls on oil, which many economists argue made the situation worse. The Iran hostage crisis, which began in 1979, lasted for 444 days and became a major embarrassment for the United States. Carter's handling of the crisis was criticized for being weak and ineffective. Carter faced strong opposition from both parties in Congress, which made it difficult for him to pass significant legislation or implement his policies effectively. Carter's administration was accused of fiscal irresponsibility, with large budget deficits and a growing national debt. Carter's presidency was often perceived as weak and ineffective, particularly after the Iran hostage crisis and the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. 4. Lyndon B. Johnson, the 36th President of the United States. Johnson's decision to escalate the Vietnam War in 1965, despite his initial promise to limit U.S. involvement, led to a prolonged and bloody conflict that divided the country and caused widespread protests. Johnson's administration failed to develop a clear plan for post-war Vietnam, leading to a power vacuum and instability in the region. Johnson's domestic agenda, including his Great Society programs, was criticized for being too ambitious and unrealistic. Johnson's administration was marred by several scandals, including the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which led to increased U.S. involvement in Vietnam, and the scandal surrounding his vice president, Hubert Humphrey. Johnson's economic policies, including his decision to fund the Vietnam War through deficit spending, led to high inflation and economic instability. 3. Calvin Coolidge, the 30th President of the United States. Coolidge's leadership style was often seen as passive and unengaged, leading to a perception that he was not actively governing the country. Coolidge's administration opposed many of the policies of his successor, Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal, which aimed to address the Great Depression. Coolidge believed in limited government intervention and low taxes, which was seen as out of touch with the economic realities of the time. Despite the economic growth during his presidency, many Americans continued to struggle with poverty and inequality. Despite being a Republican president, Coolidge did not actively support women's suffrage, leaving it to Congress to pass the 19th Amendment granting women the right to vote in 1920, very based. 2. William Howard Taft, the 27th President of the United States. Taft's diplomatic efforts were unsuccessful, including his inability to secure ratification of the League of Nations and his handling of the U.S. withdrawal from the Hague Conventions. The Taft-Hartley Act, which allowed states to pass right-to-work laws, was seen as a betrayal of organized labor and a blow to workers' rights. Taft was known for his intense personality and was accused of bullying Supreme Court justices, including Justice John Marshall Harlan, which led to a breakdown in relations between the branches of government. Taft was accused of cronyism and patronage, appointing friends and allies to important positions without regard for merit or qualifications. 1. Woodrow Wilson, the 28th President of the United States. Wilson's leadership during World War I has been criticized for being indecisive and overly idealistic. He initially maintained a policy of neutrality, which was seen as inconsistent with his later decision to enter the war. Wilson's administration was accused of being responsible for the assassination of Robert F. Lenin, a labor leader and union organizer, who was killed by a mob backed by the U.S. government. Wilson's administration was criticized for its heavy-handed treatment of immigrants and radicals, including the Palmer raids, which targeted alleged communists and anarchists. Wilson's handling of the Paris Peace Conference and the Treaty of Versailles has been criticized for being overly optimistic and unrealistic, leading to the rise of Nazi Germany and World War II. Many historians have argued that Wilson's legacy has been overhyped and that his presidency was more symbolic than substantial, with some critics even considering him one of the worst presidents in American history. And that's a wrap on our countdown of the 8 worst presidents of the 1900s. From William Howard Taft's lackluster leadership to Woodrow Wilson's flawed foreign policy, we've seen some serious presidential shortcomings. So next time you're thinking about the leaders who shaped our country, remember that even the best of intentions can lead to disastrous consequences. And who knows? Maybe one day we'll learn from these examples and elect leaders who truly put America first. Thanks for watching Memento Solis, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more content on American history and politics. See you in the next video.